time now, to make a living, I've actually been working in the heart of finance capital in various banks and financial institutions as an economist in the City of London. So in many ways, I can see the insides of the nastiness which represents the way in which finance capital operates, particularly in the UK compared to other countries. Since retired, obviously, I've spent a lot of time now just trying to analyse the state of capitalism in the world from an academic, theoretical point of view. A number of books which Stuart's pointed out that I've done over the past few years, looking at how world capitalism is developing and what the best explanation of what's happening to a world economy is, based on various theories that have been presented in the past by socialists in particular, Marx and others, which I think provides us with the best explanation. But tonight, I want to, as it were, review what has happened in the last month, because it's a month exactly to the day since we had the general election on December the 12th. So it's an opportune moment for us to consider a little more, less frenzied atmosphere about what did happen in that election and what we can learn from it. And the first thing I think we should say is, which I found very interesting, was that on the night, the exit polls said that the Conservatives would win with 12 percentage points advantage over Labour. And what was the election result? 12 percentage points ahead for the Tories over Labour. At the beginning of the campaign, most of the polls said the Tories were going to have 12 percentage points advantage over Labour. At the end of the 6-week campaign, it was 12 percentage points advantage for the Conservatives over Labour. So it would appear that all that frenzied campaign, broadcasting, arguing the toss in the streets amongst people, had little or no effect on the overall result, because people in a way had made up their minds, even before that election campaign began, that how they were going to vote. Yes, I'm sure there were people who changed their minds and so on, but on the whole, that was what we found. And one of the most extra things was, I remember on the day, because I was in London, people were saying, there were pictures on the TV saying, massive queues, it's going to be a big turnout, and so queues all in the morning to get into the polls. I've heard that so many times, because when it came down to the end of the story, actually the turnout was lower than it was in 2017. It was 67.5%, down from 69%. So there was a number of people who didn't vote this time. And in fact, what I always say is that the no-vote party won again, that of the total people eligible to vote in that election, the biggest group were the people who didn't vote. This has been the case now for some period of time, particularly since the last 10 years of austerity and the downturn in the economies of the world, but particularly in Britain too, and the hit that people have taken in their conditions for a while, wages and employment, but also in public services and in general well-being. That there's a whole layer of people in this country who do not vote. I'm not even counting the people who didn't bother to register, but even the people who did register, 1/3 of them didn't vote, and that was the biggest proportion of those people. But when we look at the actual people who did vote, what happened in the election? Well, the Conservatives went from Theresa May's 42% to Boris Johnson's 44%. Not much higher, a little higher, but basically not much higher before. The big change, of course, was that the Labour vote fell from 40% to 32%. 8 percentage points disappeared from the Labour vote. The Liberal vote went up a little bit to 11% from 8%, and the others were the same as before. So the crucial question for us in this election was, why did the Labour vote go down so much? That's the issue that we have to consider, particularly in the Labour movement. And when you look at it, you can see that the main issue of the campaign that dominated, in my view, and was the decisive factor in the campaign, was the question of Brexit. The Labour leaders tried to fight on all the social issues, the economic disaster that the British economy is in, the austerity, the need to change everything, to save the National Health Service, to get rid of tuition fees, to a load of measures which outlined a little bit in the article I presented before the election. a very radical and, I think, positive programme. But it had no real impact, because in the minds of most voters, not everybody, but in most voters, the issue was Brexit. And the position of the Conservatives was, get Brexit done. And that very simple slogan was enough. Not everybody voted for that, because otherwise it would have been 100%. But it had a sufficient effect, and I think in this particular way, is that the Conservatives under May were split, facing UKIP taking a lot of votes, and in the European elections, which you've probably forgotten, UKIP, or Brexit as it was then, did a massive gain in the numbers of MEPs and 25% of the vote and so on. But when it came to the December election, that had all coalesced more or less under the Conservatives. If we look at the position, I've added it up, Tories 44%, Brexit 5%, UKIP got 1%, still exists by the way. So the total of the Brexit vote, if you like, in the country was 50% of those who voted. Labour 33, if you want to call that a Remain vote, which isn't entirely true. Liberals 11%, Greens 2, the Scottish Nationalists 4. I'll make that 50%. So the country was completely split on this issue, but the difference was that those who wanted to leave the European Union, who voted for it in 2016 and stuck to that position 3 years later, voted for the Conservatives to achieve that, while those who wanted to stay in the European Union and voted for it in the referendum to stay in the European Union, which was still 48% of people who voted, were split between 3 or 4 parties about whether to stay in the European Union, so that Labour wasn't able to carry all the Remain vote. Now, some people say that if they'd stuck to a position which is more Brexiter, they would have been able to get a better vote. That's a line I hear at the moment. Well, I've had a quick look at the figures of what happens with the Labour vote. Of the Labour vote, they lost 8 percentage points. 1/3 of that was lost by people who just no longer voted Labour. They just didn't turn out. They weren't there. Another third, actually more than a third, the majority, were people who wanted Remain, but went and voted Liberal Democrat or Green to get that, mainly Liberal Democrat. So Labour lost Remain voters